Iranian protesters have a supporter in President Trump. In a tweet, he said his national security advisor suggests the sanctions and protests have choked off Iran, so they will negotiate. He said he couldn't care less if Iran's leaders want to negotiate and told them, don't kill your protesters. Karim Sadjadpour is an Iran expert and senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He joins me now. And let's go further on what you will have heard me talking about to Nick Robertson. Do these protesters have any hope of affecting any real change?
Well, a couple of points. First, I think Nick's analysis was spot on. I'd say, first of all, the popular outrage in Iran somewhat constrains the Iranian regime's ability to retaliate, to avenge the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, because people are really have been profoundly affected by the shoot down of this airplane and the death of 176 innocents, because they realize that they stand to pay the price for further escalation between the United States and Iran.
And what about this idea that the firing of the missiles was only ever just a momentary smoke screen, the firing of the Iranian missiles at the Iraqi base, a smoke screen, that the real retribution and retaliation for Soleimani's death will come in some form of proxy action 3 or 6 months down the road? Do you buy that?
Yeah, I suspect that they are going to continue to try to make President Trump pay a price, and they have a whole menu of different options, whether that's proxy warfare, drone warfare, cyber attacks. I also suspect that they will try to do something to humiliate President Trump just before the 2020 presidential election.
How far will Iran go in using force against its own people?
They will go all the way, because this is a regime which doesn't have a plan B. They believe that if they don't kill and do everything they can to stay in power, they have nowhere else to go. And so you have a regime which is heavily armed, heavily organized, and willing to kill, in a society which is none of those things.
Do you subscribe to the view that there was a cruel calculation in leaving the airspace open, designed to prevent attacks?
I do believe that the regime essentially didn't ground the airplanes because they believed that if there were commercial flights flying over Iran, the United States would be less willing to retaliate against Iranian attacks on the Iraqi airbase. There's a long history of the Iranian regime essentially using its own citizens as shields.
So what happens next? I mean, the Iranians clearly are, I've said they're sort of working with the Canadians. The Canadians may get much more access to the investigation than anybody else, but we know what happened. I mean, civil aviation geeks and reporters like me need to know more, because we need to know how to prevent it happening again, and what happens to the aircraft in those situations. But otherwise, I assume, does anybody manage to gain leverage in this from the other countries?
Listen, I think that the regime tried to, first they denied that it was the missile. They tried to lie about it. And so popular anger in Iran is only going to dissipate. The protests are only going to be quelled by violence. And I think that this is a moment which is going to stay for Iranians for many years to come, because when people look at the passengers on that plane, they identify with a lot of them in a way that they don't identify with Qasem Soleimani. These were young Iranians who had bright futures, not Revolutionary Guard commanders out wielding violence throughout the Middle East. So I think this is a blow which the regime is not going to recover from. That's not to say that they can't kill their way out of it.
Finally, let's just take that last thing that you've said, that they're not going to recover from. That's not to say they're not going to kill their way out of it. What does that mean in practical terms in the next 3 to 6 months?
In practical terms, in the next 3 to 6 months, I don't think you're going to see a political change within Iran, because the regime is firmly committed to staying in power. But if you're looking at this from the vantage point of the United States, it may be that the regime is more constrained than they were before to retaliate, because they no longer have a popular mandate to do so.
We're very glad you came on tonight to help us understand it. We appreciate it. Thank you.